Welcome back to Why It Matters. This is a video game show I wanted to create to detail and discuss video gaming history. Many of today's youth do not know the history of my favorite hobby. Whether you're a gamer or just someone who plays games occasionally, it's important for us to know the roots of gaming. With that said, I am detailing how video games were almost not a thing in America due to one company's terrible policies, greed, and failure of quality control. And who knows, this might have ended up stemming to the rest of the world as well. Today's topic is the video game crash of 1983. However, as new generations come, people forget. With Atari announcing a new console and partnering with the LGBT community to make inclusive games, there is no better time to detail and discuss this event. Video games came onto the scene in America through the arcades of the early 1980s. If you look to what we have today, you might find a few arcades in places like malls or theme parks, but for the most part, every arcade on every corner is gone. The remnants are, well, they're laughable at best. While companies like Sega were on the rise for the arcade gaming revolution, Atari saw the potential to bring these games home. Kind of. As we know, it takes quite a bit of power to emulate an arcade machine properly. These days, a Raspberry Pi could do that, and our phones could even do that. But back then, PCs were limited to DOS, and the games were beyond limited. That's not to say that they weren't fun, it's just that they were very limited in scope and size. For a time comparison, it would take until after around the year 2000 for our console hardware and PC hardware to be able to emulate arcade machines properly. So then, how does a console being produced in the 1980s do this 20 years earlier? Because those arcade ports were terrible. They were absolutely terrible. The biggest example of the worst arcade port was Pac-Man. It was so bad it might not have even been playable, honestly. This is Pac-Man, yes, that Pac-Man, the basic run around and eat the dots, sometimes ghosts and fruit, basic gameplay Pac-Man. But this was just the start of how the video game crash of 1983 began. That said, Atari saw the potential in these cartridge-based ports. Atari saw that instead of just having an arcade cabinet-like console, where the console had one or several games like multiple variations of table tennis, using cartridges instead, imagine no longer having to go to the arcade to spend money per play, but instead being able to pop in random game cartridges into a game system in the comfort of your own home, and play whatever you like, and not be tied down to just one game system with the games on it. And playing games like Galaga and Pac-Man on it as well, what could go wrong? If it was just a few bad games on Atari's part, then this video game crash would not have happened. But it was much, much more than just a few bad ports. It wasn't just bad ports, it was what leads up to the bad ports. What caused these bad ports? And combining with bad company policies with greed are exactly what led to this. Beginning with the poor company policies, not only did Atari go through financial troubles, buyouts from other companies later, like Time Warner, Atari did not also want to credit its game creators. As a direct result, their failure to give the game developers credit for their work caused these same developers to often leave. And in one of those times, a company known as Activision was formed. Yes, that Activision. When you treat people that work for you like crap, these things happen where the developers begin to not care about their work. This was intensified when Atari came to these same developers and said, you have 6 weeks to program a game for a movie tie-in. E.T., the movie that was so major, the game that was so terrible. Howard Scott Warshaw, in many interviews and videos over this game, has said that if he just had 2 or 3 extra days to work on the game, it wouldn't have been so bad. Deadlines can kill games, and not be given credit for your own work while being forced to create these games as fast as possible, it all breeds terrible quality. This ties in with Atari's greed, because due to the potential movie tie-in, it might have single-handedly created the crash where people no longer had trust in Atari. You ever heard of the Nintendo seal of quality? There is a reason Nintendo had something called the lockout chip, because while games like E.T. and Pac-Man were terrible, they were first-party games from the company Atari themselves. But there were many games that were terrible that were not first-party games, but rather developed by random studios studios that had the notion to get rich quick with video games that had to do little to nothing just to publish their games on the Atari consoles. Again, this breeds extremely failed quality control and then causes more and more games to be produced for a console that were not only clones, but crap with nothing more to do in them than get a high score. They were exactly the same as the original, just a reskin. I can cite one example of this in a nutshell, and that would be a game based upon a dog food company, Chuck Wagon, a game based on Purina dog food. This was real. This was a real deal thing. Combine games like this with the simple fact that there's no real internet, no YouTube, no magazines explaining the games themselves, no experienced games journalists and reviewers, and what do you get? You get a market of people who have no idea what games to buy and why. Whatever was on the front box of the games was what people judged the game was, and this was basic 8-bit graphics of Atari 2600, so it often didn't match up. Atari's greed and terrible policies led to terrible quality control, which led to the market seeing games like E.T. and Pac-Man. It's one thing to have terrible third-party game support, or even terrible first-party game support, but then to have both, and a company that would charge massive amounts for each game, and what do you get in the end is a massive amount of people questioning why they even bothered spending their money in the first place. Not only that, but these games weren't labeled, and there were similar games and game consoles like the ColecoVision competing with Atari, with similar game cartridge sizes, causing massive confusion in the market even more so. Imagine not knowing if the game you are buying is for the Xbox One or PlayStation 4 until you got home and it didn't work on your system. So why it matters is because if we do not learn from these policies, then we will see companies again fall into this trap. There is a reason why games are labeled for consoles now, and there is a reason that games must go through these companies to get their products onto a console. There are reasons why people and companies are credited for their work now on these game boxes. And with the current state of indie titles on Steam, those games make Steam look like a modern day Atari. But thanks to reviewing services, internet, magazines, and generally speaking the knowledge and experience we have now, this prevents another video game crash from occurring. However, this will only last so long as people remember, as long as people never forget how one greedy company could have destroyed gaming forever. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why it matters. If you enjoyed this content, consider becoming a Maverick today, and consider subscribing to my channel for more episodes of Why It Matters every Saturday. Mavericks separate themselves from the sheep by gaining knowledge, so don't miss out on time-condensed historical episodes catching you up on over 40 years of gaming history. And if you truly enjoyed this video, please leave me a like and share it with someone who you think might not know this information. I want to thank you for watching, and as always, good gaming and God bless, and once again, thanks for watching.